We have a fantastic conversation today. It was such an honor to have Justin Earley on. Justin is a lawyer, author, speaker from Richmond, Virginia. He graduated from the University of Virginia with a degree in English literature before spending 4 years in Shanghai, China as a missionary. Justin got his law degree from Georgetown University, and he now runs his own law practice in Richmond, Virginia. He's written 3 books: The Common Rule, Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction; Habits of the Household, Practicing the Story of God in Everyday Family Rhythms; and Made for People, which was his most recent book in 2023. And we are currently reading Habits of the Household.
I've been reading it. Jeremy's reading it vicariously through me, as you do in marriage, to be more efficient with your time. But this is the only book that I have read in the past 5-6 months, and I've been reading it over the course of 5-6 months in 20-minute increments. It really is so helpful as a young mom in just implementing practical things with our young kids. I read it in my 20-minute sauna sessions, and I can do that and pick up wherever I left off, having not read it for 3 days. There is some powerful nuggets of wisdom in here, and like I said, practical things that you can implement with your kids that Justin talks a lot about in this episode with us. You guys are gonna love the takeaways from this episode. I think it's going to be super valuable for anyone with young families raising little kids in the times that we are in. So
let's get in it.
Episode. Justin, we're so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here. I've been diving into your book over the course of the past 5 months. Yes, it's taken me that long to go through it.
That's a good pace. That's a good pace.
But I love it so much, and I thought it would take a lot longer to get you on the show, but you had a window of time, and we're just so grateful that you are giving us that window. So thanks for being here.
Y'all, I am so excited to be here. The pleasure is all mine. So thank you for reaching out.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I've been reading this book, and it's kind of funny because Jeremy and I, we've been big readers pre-kids, and then the more kids we've had, it's been much harder to be readers now in the season of life that we're in.
Yeah, I hear it.
The thing I love about this book is that I've been able to read it in 20-minute increments in my sauna sessions. So
yes.
I keep it upstairs next to our sauna, and it's I love that it's the way that you wrote it is such that I can pick it up once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whenever I can get into the sauna and read it in increments like that and not feel lost. You know, I could skip to the middle of the book and find something valuable. It's like that snack kind of book. And I love that about it because it's so practical, specifically for people like me, young moms in the season of life that we're in. And we have so many questions for you because it's a tough season that we're in right now. But I think that this book is truly, I mean, I've had a lot of friends, close friends that have read it and been deeply impacted, and a lot of friends just in the online space who've been impacted by it as well. So we're hopefully going to squeeze the juice from you today.
Let's do it. But let me say, Audrey, that's amazingly encouraging because I wrote it at that stage. You know, my youngest was 18 months, I think, when I started writing this. And I was thinking, as much as I love reading, and I think it's the keystone habit of all keystone habits, you read just a little bit every day, if that's all you can do, and everything in your life will change. But I knew that, parents have the hardest time reading. And so I tried to write it as something you could read in snatches or pick up anywhere. But it's always thrilling to hear that it works. And it's always a particular honor to hear the weird ways that it happens for people. And snatches in the sauna are great. I imagined it was going to have milk spilled on it and coffee spilled on it, or diaper bag creases. But I love the sauna routine. I love it.
Yeah. Little sweat drips and stuff.
Go for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
okay.
so we're in this season of life, the season of life that you wrote it in, and this is a hard season with 4 kids. It's really hard, and I feel like this is a book that's bringing us back to a heartbeat, like the conversations we're having. So many of our habits, and our listeners know, we talked about our habits for years now. A lot of them have gone out the window in this season. It's just really hard. Yeah.
There's had to be more grace for them.
So much change and so much adjustment, and the evening turns into the ER trip, and the morning turns into lost shoes, and so, anyways, we're returning back to habits, and so share with us your perspective. One thing I've loved is the way you synthesize habits and the paradigm shift that happens when you commit to a rule of life. And so give us your kind of habit 101. And I know we're talking specifically about this book, but this is the book we're reading right now.
Right.
Yeah, synthesize habits for us, if you will.
Well, I think everybody knows that parenting is incredibly difficult. It's one of the first things that smacks you in the face. But I don't think we often realize why in particular it's so difficult. And I think one of those reasons is because it knocks you back on your instincts, as in you're responding to so much out of habit and out of instinct. And you don't actually know what those are. And you realize you didn't actually form them. So most people, I think, don't articulate this. But one of the most important things about parenting is what instincts and habits you're falling back on, because that's where you're living most of the time. You're not planning for the tantrum on aisle 3 when you go to the supermarket, but here you are, right? And so we're constantly responding. And that means much of life, of parenting, but really all of life, needs to be thought through in terms of habit. Now, that's actually more true of almost everything that we think. And this was my impetus to start writing. So my brief story is that I began my life as a missionary in China outside of law school. I graduated from UVA. I began my life as a missionary in China, and then I went to law school. And it was in my transition from law school to lawyering that I had this really significant mental health breakdown, where I realized lawyering and my interests into it had reset all these new habits in my life, but I never knew that I was adopting all these new routines. I just was doing it by virtue of becoming a lawyer. And I ended up my first year of lawyering like a nervous wreck of mental health. I was coping through medications, through drinking just to fall asleep. And mind you, I had 2 young children at this time. And as I was trying to figure out why my life fell apart, because like in my head, my worldview is all the same as it always had been.
Yeah.
But my life had become something entirely different. And this was my first wake up to the key idea of habit that you asked about, Jeremy. And that's that when your head goes one way and your habits go the other, your life, your identity, your heart tends to follow the habit. And this, I think, is the big insight for people. And this is why we can think through all the things we want to think through in parenting. But if we don't turn it into a habit, then like that idea of I want to respond to my kids like this goes out the window when the moment of discipline actually comes. And so I started to see that spiritual disciplines, routines, the ways that we organize our life was most of life, and they were actually most of the important things about life. And that's when I started to think this could be a beautiful thing if I thought about parenting more as the realm of habit. Like, what would it look like to set up my routines so that I'm moving more towards love for my children rather than frustration, more towards teaching us how to love God together rather than frustration. And that was the impetus for this book in the first place.
Yeah, that's really good.
Really good. And can you just explain really quickly what a rule of life is, like for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with that?
Yeah. So my breakdown led me to this realization that was totally not new, right? So it was new to me that, oh my gosh, most of life is habit, and we should probably pick them on purpose so we can sort of organize the direction of our life. But this is actually ancient wisdom. It's us moderns who have lost it. And I'll tell you why, just really briefly.
Yeah.
Most of us moderns, particularly in the American context, but really all over the Western world, have such an individualistic idea of freedom. And so we think about our life as our individual units and what we will choose in any given moment, and us choosing for ourselves in any given moment what we want to do is sort of seen as the definition of the good life. And unfortunately, this is just not the correct way to think about life. It's very unique to our moment, and it's just, it gets it very wrong. Like when you don't think about anything but what you want to do in any given moment, you tend to actually become the slave of some unknown master. And your phone is probably the best example of this. Like by not having any rules around it and by deciding I just want to do whatever I want to do, you become the slave of Silicon Valley. And we could apply this anywhere. But the ancients, the biblical writers, and most people before us didn't think about life like this. They thought about us as the products of community and rhythms of that community. So we're formed by the norms of the culture and the communities we live in. And so everybody from like you look at the story of Daniel in the Bible, or the believers in Acts, or anybody who was leading a monastery or spiritual community or church throughout the 2 millennia since Jesus walked the earth, they tended to have these things called rules of life, which were sets of habits for their community in order to be formed in the love of God and neighbor in the particular cultural moment they were in. So it depended on where you lived and what you were up against to say, we should live like this, or pray like this, or work like this. And so they thought of life in terms of a set of habits. And this was just sort of intuitive. And my great hope is that we in our modern context would recover this ancient wisdom in all places of life, in work and family and church life and whatever you do. Because honestly, it's also just really good life advice that if you want to form your life in a direction of purpose, you need to work communally and pick a set of habits to do that. And that's the idea of a rule of life.
Yeah, love that. That's good. We actually, one of the pastors and teachers that was the church that Jeremy and I met at, John Mark Comer, I don't know if you're familiar, but he talks a lot about
he talks about this a little bit.
Yeah. And so some people, a lot of our listeners are familiar with the term just by nature of we had him on and explained a little bit, but it's always good to hear just like that breakdown again for people that don't know.
Yeah.
Because,
what's so good about that is like, you are your habits, whether you are conscious of it or not. And you just said it, so why not choose them?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, we have to choose them because you are them. But a lot, we don't, and this is the paradigm shift, Justin, I think you bring that's so relevant and healthy, is like, we have to first recognize you are a byproduct of a set of habits.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you don't like where you're at, change the habits, change the outcome.
Yes.
And then I want you to speak on or talk about something that is so good, and that is because habits tend to be 80% of your day and 60% subconscious, meaning you don't even know they're happening.
Right.
Means most of them are mundane, boring, just grind,
Yep.
So, but in the consciousness shift of mundane to intentional, of doesn't matter to purposeful, there's this sacred, almost like translation of like they become something way more special because you've put attention to them. How do you make talk through that, like, because so much of it is boring and normal, but that's kind of the game.
Well, I think there are two really, really encouraging things to realizing that most of life is habit.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I think it relieves you of the burden of picking new ones. Why? Because we might say, all right, let's talk about habits of the household, the ways that you can engage your children in habits and pick formative ones. And people are like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so exhausted. I can't do this right now. Like, I can't think about this. And the good news is, it's like, no. This is better than what you were doing, because here's the thing: you didn't notice, but you already have 1,000 invisible habits that are making you a slave to your phone, the normal American busy schedule, the ways we typically engage in consumerism, all the anxiety and depression that's typical of American life. Like, you have a rule of life. Hello, no one doesn't. You have a way of discipleship. You just didn't call it that. And the great news about choosing them on purpose is now we can say, oh my gosh, there's this paradigm that Jesus gave of the easy yoke, the light burden, which is the idea that following him is a way of life. It is a set of habits. There is a rule of life to it. But the huge difference is Jesus loves you back. Silicon Valley doesn't love you back. American consumerism doesn't love you back. And Jesus, the reason we call it the light yoke is because he's under it with you. Right?
Yeah.
So there's what I want to tell people is the hard thing to do is to do nothing. That is exhausting. And so that's the first reason why thinking about this is really encouraging. And the second reason is more specifically to what you asked, Jeremy, and that is that it takes the ordinary moments and says, oh, no. There's no ordinary moments. Yeah. There's only extraordinary spiritual formation going on. This is the sort of C.S. Lewis lens of saying that, any human you look at is like an angel or demon. And any person that you look at is this incredible spiritual creature. And any moment that you look at in your life is actually this incredible life or death stakes of who will you worship and who will you choose, and what will your life become like because of that. And so for me, that you could actually get really nervous and be like, this isn't encouraging at all. This is super high stakes. But no. I think it's super encouraging because for me, as a former missionary, and then as a lawyer, it was easy to get back to the house and think, all I'm doing is changing diapers, cleaning up bodily fluids, like trying to stay awake in these like late night sessions. And what does this like mean? Like, what's the significance here? And that idea, that knee-jerk reaction we have to the ordinary life of parenting of like, all I'm doing is da-da-da-da-da, is just so wrong. And I think it's a beautiful flip to look at life and realize that actually all that you're doing here is the extraordinary work of forming a human being in the image of God. And that means all that you're doing has life and possibility to it. Like, this is, the monastery is right here. The mission field is right here. The extraordinary is right here. You don't need to go leave the house to find it. It's actually, you're doing something extraordinary, because these ordinary moments are the ones that form our lives. And so I think it gives dignity to the work of parenting. And that, I think, is an encouraging way to start, to realize, oh, this is going to be easier than what I was doing. And this is going to make the whole thing more beautiful than I ever thought it was. When I started to make those mental flips, I was like, I want to do, like, I'm all in. I want to do this. Like, where can I look for habits?
I feel like that really resonates with me, and probably any young mom listening, just knowing that this isn't an add to, it's just a shift. It's a change. You're already doing the things a certain way, and maybe some are effective and maybe some aren't, but it's just recognizing what, like you explained, one of the things I think was really helpful is just when you're talking about transitions, which I think with young children in this season of life, those transitional moments from getting ready to go out the door, breakfast or before bedtime, or these moments where there can be tension. And having, there are habits that your family has around that moment. It's hectic, yelling at everyone to get on their shoes and run out the door, right? Or it's, let's all gather before we scatter, like you talk about. Let's all have this moment of prayer before we go out the door. Let's light the candle before we have dinner.
And it doesn't mean it's not hectic.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not hectic. Certainly doesn't in our situation. But I like that it's like those, it's attainable, right? It's not like you're adding some big thing that you have to do that you need to implement in your life and you already feel like you're drowning. It's just you're shifting it a little bit, or you're adding a visual cue to it for your kids to see this is a new thing is happening here. And that was really impactful for me, because and real quick, I just want a brief story on that. But one of the things that my mom did really, really well was every single day before we left for school, me and my siblings, she prayed for us every single day. We could not leave the house without her covering us in prayer. We went to public school, like raised in a Christian home, everything, but like she just went to battle for us in prayer. And I remember as a teenager leaving the house, being mad at my mom for whatever reason. And she made me come home and be late to school so that she could pray for me. It was like such a thing. And looking back now, I'm like, that was such a shaping thing. It was not only just a transitional habit moment, but like it was something I could rely on from my mom, even when we were mad at each other. She was still going to do it. And and obviously, like, the power of prayer is so huge in and of itself. The fact that she just covered me all those years. But that, like, I mean, you talk about that in the book. You talk about that, like, gathering before we scatter concept. And I think that was something that I was experiencing that was a habit in my life that, I didn't recognize now until I'm in my 30s. But realizing now, like, how impactful that probably was for a lot of different reasons. But can you talk about that a little bit? Just some of the things that were really helpful for you that you share in the book, different ways of those of basically like having a habit, having a cue for the habit in those transitional moments. Like tell some of those stories or examples that you have from the book.
It's funny that you ask on this particular day, because this morning was really interesting in our house. My wife just had surgery last week, so she's in bed. And she's gonna be well. She's doing great. But so I was on my own this morning, getting the 4 boys out the door, and there were lots of shoes that could not be found, right? Like this is apparently the hardest thing in the world to keep track of shoes.
No matter how many systems you have for where the shoes go, they always break.
And as an ode to moms everywhere, like you need the mom for this question. Like they ask me, where are my shoes? And I'm like, I literally have no idea. I'm having trouble finding mine. But mom was nowhere to be found. So we spent a lot of this morning looking for shoes. We were behind. One of the coolest things happened. When my littlest, Shep, he's 6 now, finally found his shoes, he came running to the door, and I was in a different room, still trying to find the other ones. And his 3 brothers were at the door, and I heard from down the hallway, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, thank you for this day. Bless us as we work, study, and pray. They started doing our morning prayer without me, without Lauren. She was still in bed. And I got there just in time to say amen, and all the boys walked out the door. And a couple, and this actually never happened before, so it's funny we're having this conversation today, but a couple beautiful things there. One of the easy, light burdens of habit, before it ever becomes spiritual, is what you just said, Audrey, that they become cues for transition moments. Mm-hmm. So they take away the mental burden of we need to do this now and just replace it with that. And this is why, like, I call habit God's neurological gift to us. This is why so much of life is easier than it would otherwise be. I mean, think about the gift of God in making it so that we don't have to think as hard as a 2-year-old does when we tie a shoe. Like, can you imagine the mental overload we'd have of everything? So it's just, we think of it as like, oh, this is just the way the world is. But
the problem is we don't think of it, right? Like
yes. I mean, that is
because it's habit.
That's an atheistic way to think about our bodies and the world. It's like, oh, well, this is just what brains do as they grow. Well, I think it's God's gift to us that we don't have to think that hard. Like, it's amazing. We can do amazing things. And so it's just a way to glorify God to say, oh, we can make this unconscious now. And so we've made prayer unconscious, which you might be like, well, but shouldn't we be conscious? Like, yeah, sort of. But we have this like formative prayer that we say at the door every morning. And now I see my kids are doing it without me. And that's, I see the pass off that you were just sharing a little bit, like your mom did this and now you think about prayer this way. And the basic theory of the whole book is that if we become our habits and our kids become us, then the habits of the household are probably the most important part of their spiritual formation. Yeah. And so picking those little things like prayer at the door, like lighting a candle before meals and saying Christ is light, like making them clean the kitchen every evening after dinner, because that's a habit that teaches them hospitality and work, bedtime prayers, hugs of reconciliation after moments of discipline. None of these things take that long, and none of them are particularly hard either. And yet all of them do this wildly disruptive thing of saying, our house is going to be one liturgy of worship to the God who actually made us and who we want to become like. And so we're going to look for him in the little moments and in the big moments. And a beautiful thing happens when we recover those little moments. We and they become shaped in the love of God.
Yeah. And we don't even know what's happening. Like, it's just happening.
Right. And that doesn't mean it's not spiritual or it's not grace. I mean, so much of our life we don't know what's happening, and it's God's grace saying your bones are going to grow, child. Your brain is going to develop. That life will go on. And that there's just grace abounding. And so when we set up our bodies for health by eating a certain way, or set up our habits for spiritual health by directing our household a certain way, those are both great ideas. But it is still the overabundance of the Lord's grace that makes any of them work at all. So we're being faithful to the call, but he's being faithful to the results. And that's, we can interweave this throughout the discussion, but that's a very important part of thinking about this stuff, because otherwise we tend to think, well, habit is what I do. And so that means it's either legalistic or it's effort-based or it's not spiritual. No. Habit is a way of honoring the God who brought you to life, is saving you and redeeming you and sanctifying. And this is just part of dancing with him. It's part of saying, I want to move to this music.
Yep. Wow. Habit is, it's intentionally choosing patterns to harmonize with God. Like it's...
Yeah. One of the things that Jeremy always says to the kids, and I don't know if this is a you quote or somebody else that you stole it from, but he always says, how you do anything,
everything's stolen.
How you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
And
I
we
love
have
it.
that quote in our homeschool room, but Jared reminds the kids all the time, like, how you do anything is how you do everything. Is that how you're going to clear your plate? That's how you're going to put it next to the sink? That's how you're going to do everything. You're going to be sloppy about it, And it's just this constant, they're going to hear that their whole life.
And that's what Justin does so good is paradigm shifting. Because like as it's, how do you get the consciousness of the kid, out from the rut of the world into the spirit, elevate their mind, right? Like these subtle exit ramps, off ramps to a higher state of mind where they can consciously analyze life or choose and be put in a new way that reaps a different result, which I would say would be a result of spirit, right? Like fruits of spirit type thing.
What? Okay,
That's
you touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about the bedtime liturgies and the liturgy for reconciliation? Just how liturgy is a part of all of this?
Yeah. And this is, for anybody who's looked at the book, this was sort of my entry point to realizing the significance of this whole conversation. I had a night where I was putting my boys down, and the putting the 4 boys to bed is about as chaotic as you think putting 4 young boys to bed is.
How long is your wrestling time?
Oh my gosh.
We only have 2 boys.
Ours is called Mean Dragon.
I love it. I have so much to say about that, but it's long and it's constant. And there's never a time my abs aren't tightened because I always got to be ready for a punch to the stomach.
Yeah.
But so this is a couple years ago. I'm putting them all to bed, and it's just chaotic and hectic. And I'm like doing my thing where I yell them to bed and threatening enormous bodily violence if they don't put PJs on. And I remember, like I said, like God loves you, I do too prayer, and then like headed out the door. And this was my conviction point, because I remember standing in the hallway that night and realizing that my behavior was completely inconsistent with the love of God, and that this is the distinction that we mentioned earlier. My words, my head was over here. I love you, God does too. My habit was over here. It's like, obey or I'm going to yell, like obey or you're going to experience anger and shame. And that was the beginning of me trying to reform bedtimes. And it was on the advice of a friend, actually, that I tried bedtime liturgy, where we did this back and forth. And our first one was this back and forth of, can you see my eyes? They would say yes. I would say, can you see that I see your eyes? They would say yes. And then I'd say 2 really important questions. Do you know that I love you? Do you know that I love you no matter what bad or good things you do? And their answer was to be yes to all of that. And that was this first moment where I realized, one, we could incorporate things that would help me behave as much as help them behave. So we talked about the transitions earlier, right?
Mm-hmm. That's good.
The big thing for me was not that this made everything easy, because I remember the first time we did it, I was like, can you see my eyes? And they're like, yeah, let me poke you in the eyes, or let me poke my brother in the eyes, because I see eyes everywhere and now I'm going to touch them. Or I remember I asked them, I love you no matter what bad things you do. And they were like, no, you don't, right? And I was like, oh no, this is not a good answer. The answer is supposed to be yes, even when you're misbehaved, I still love you. And so it wasn't smooth. It wasn't easy. It didn't fix all the behavior at bedtime. But I remember one time, a couple weeks in, and any habit has to be practiced, right? So we practiced this liturgy over and over. And one night we just did it together. In fact, they asked for it. And I remember shutting the door that night and realizing, oh, here's the thing. All the circumstances were the same. It was still messy. It was still bedtime. Nothing was necessarily easy. But my behavior was different. My reactions were different, because a good gospel liturgy, as I'll call it, a rhythm of the household that became a liturgy of worship, opened up my heart and their hearts to new ways of loving God and loving each other. It made me so that I wasn't just driving towards the moment. I would shut the door and be like, oh, finally, I'm done. I was driving towards a new moment. And that's when I realized this power of a gospel liturgy in the household. And it can be at bedtime, it can be lots of places, but that it changed my knee-jerk reactions to ordinary circumstances. And then we were acting different, we were reconciling different, we were behaving differently. And so bedtime, I do a ton of these now. Last night, I think we did tickle blessing last night, but nobody's on their best behavior at night. It's always hard. Everybody's tired. And to the extent that you can put habits in place, really serves your children. Because if you haven't noticed, kids love doing the same thing over and over. I mean, this was like sort of an epiphany for me at the beginning of parenting, but it's important to state, like, what do they want to do? The thing they just did. Like, what do they want to eat? The thing they just ate. Like, they love things over and over. Yeah. And it serves them to be like, we're going to do this blessing now. So they'll get in bed and be ready for it. But it also serves me because as I'm sort of like fighting the fight to get them in bed, I can tickle them and laugh and talk about how I love them instead of being like, why is this taking so long? Yeah. And so those bedtime liturgies in particular, they were my entry point. And anybody that wants, they can go on social media or look at the book. I think I even have them on the habitsofthehousehold.com website. But there's just lots of ideas there to help with different bedtime routines and different things that you can say.
Yeah. It's really, I remember when I was reading that part of the book, it's super impactful because so many nights you go to bed as a parent, like bedtime is such this like, you kind of have this built up angst about it because you're like,
it's so hard.
Yeah, it's hard. And then like, you got to clean up the kitchen afterward. Like you're thinking of all the things that you need to do after bedtime, but you've also been kind of like, you have that guilt of like looking forward to bedtime so you could have a moment to relax. But then you like want to have this moment with your kids of connection so you're not drill sergeanting them through bedtime. It's just, it's like such a tension moment. But Jeremy started doing something similar. The liturgy thing resonated where you say,
we have two of these.
Why do I love you? Yeah, you say.
And I want to say something too. It's like people get scared of the word liturgy as like I gotta go memorize. No. Like you can have and you can make your own liturgy for your family that realigns you with Christ. It's okay. Like it doesn't have to be this thing you go find and memorize or grab or take Justin's or take mine. It's like make your own thing. One of ours is like. I go, okay, guys, bedtime. Who are we? Roll-offs. Who do we follow? Jesus. What do we do? Love. Who do we love? Everyone.
I love it.
So that's one of ours. And then what's another one?
Why do I love you?
Oh, yeah. Why do I love you? And they say, because I'm your son or I'm your daughter. And I say, will you always be my daughter? And then they'll say yes. And then depending on how the day went, I'll go into like let's say they disobeyed and got in trouble a lot throughout the day. Are you still my daughter when you disobey?
Yes.
And they'll like remember the day and they'll go, yeah, I am. I'll go, and then I'll always love you because that's why I love you.
Yes.
And so that one changes. Good. It's not consistent because it's tailored to the day, but it's always taking the day and realigning them through the filter of the day with a truth, with a core concept.
Right. And that's why we call it liturgy, and that's why it can be so beautiful because like you said a minute ago, Jeremy, it's not like you have to make up something super formal or anything new.
It doesn't have to be canonicalized.
It's just this idea of, we talked about it earlier, elevating the ordinary to the extraordinary. Habits are things that we do semi-consciously to unconsciously over and over, and yet they form us. And liturgies are the things that we do semi-consciously to unconsciously, and they form us. But the difference is that liturgies, that term admits that what we're doing is about worship.
Yes.
Right? Habits often obscure what we worship, but of course that doesn't mean we're not worshiping.
Yes.
And so I like bringing the liturgy word in just to elevate and remind us that what we're doing is formative. And something like that, like that you do with your kids, is amazing because it is over and over, subconsciously to unconsciously, that's great, forming them in this idea that I'm loved despite my best behavior and despite my worst behavior. I'm loved despite the day. I'm loved despite the circumstance. I'm loved despite what I just did. And that's the core message of Christianity, that humanity is loved by God. And yet it's our fallen knee-jerk reaction to think, oh no, I'm not today. I lost it. I did something wrong. And so the beauty of making a liturgy in your home, and I do the same with my boys, when a moment of discipline, I say, what do I say about you when you do bad things? Do I still love you? What do we say at our bedtime liturgy? And they say that you love me even when I do bad things. And that's like the beginning of so many moments of discipline. I'm like, I do love you. And so I love you right now. Even when you're messed up, we're going to talk about it. We're going to address it. I'm still the authority. We're going to change it. But love is not the question.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, we are so excited. We're having our biggest sale of the year on all of our books and journals, up to 35% off at beating50%.com. We've got some awesome gift ideas for you guys this season.
As you know, we believe in communication wholeheartedly. We think it's the vital linchpin of healthy relationships, specifically healthy marriages. We create tools and resources for people to connect, communicate, and grow in love, and also just to celebrate their love stories, celebrate their life. So that's what Memories of Christmas is. Families can celebrate Christmas. There's a place to put your Christmas card, photo, document what you did that season. Memories of Us, more for the anniversary, the marriage, what you did every year. And this ends up, for us, it's ended up being just a documentation of our life. So it's been fun to see what we've hoped for, what we've dreamt for, what we've prayed for, and how our life has continually unfolded.
And they're super simple, once-a-year journals that you fill in, 50-year heirloom journal and a 25-year heirloom Christmas journal. Then we also have the marriage journal, tried and true, is our first resource. Got a brand new cover on the marriage journal if you want to get the black and gold version, available this weekend. And then most excited about this one, we are bringing back Connect Cards Couples Edition for our Black Friday Cyber Monday sale, but it's pre-sale only. So this will not ship until early 2025, and we decided to create 2 new versions of Connect Cards for you guys. So we are also going to be available for pre-sale. You can also get Connect Cards Family Edition and Connect Cards Legacy Edition.
Yes.
So the Family Edition is questions to ask your kids around the table, maybe over dinner or on a road trip. And then the Legacy Edition is questions that you can ask your parents or grandparents. This might be a great gift for parents or grandparents this holiday season to get those stories out of them and really
a different way
understand them better.
A different way to communicate with the elderly folks in your life.
So again, this is pre-sale only for Connect Cards. These sold out in 24 hours when we launched them earlier this fall. So if you want to get them on pre-sale, you have to do it before Monday night at midnight. Again, you can get all of our books and journals and resources at beating50%.com, up to 35% off on all of the books in our shop, and beating50%.com. Happy Thanksgiving.
And remember to find and still seek. Now that is love.
Okay, going into that a little bit, because you just talked about reconciliation, and you talk about that a lot in the book. Reconciliation, how you get your boys to reconcile, and you have the brotherly hug.
The brother's hug. Yeah, the brother's hug. Yeah.
Talk about that and how you got to that, and does it always work, and does it still work?
We did one yesterday between the cousins, actually. I think this is great for little. I think this is great for little children.
Yeah.
We call it the brother's hug, and what they do is that after they apologize and they have to look at each other's eyes and say, I'm sorry. And then after they say, I forgive you, and if they have to look at each other's eyes and say, I forgive you, we try to figure out a way to reconcile, because, I like to say in theological terms, like atonement in and of itself is not the great message of the gospel. It's part of it, that we are forgiven and our sins have been wiped away. But there's more, that God actually comes for us to reconcile us and bring us back. And so forgiveness is not the end of our story, nor should it be the end of our relational stories. We need to figure out how to be happy again, like how to be with each other again. And so the brother's hug is they have to hug and hold on to each other for long enough, however long it takes for both of them to smile again. And for little kids, this is really sweet, because for like a couple seconds of hugging and they're like grinning and wrestling again. I literally did this with my nephew and my son yesterday, because my son punched one of his cousins and they had to reconcile. And then I was like, we didn't need to do a cousin's hug. They were like, I don't want to. They're like, well, we need to figure out a way to reconcile. And, they ended up hugging and then smirking and then going off to play together again. And I think for little kids, this is a beautiful way to, again, put a liturgy in the house, remind us that it's not a mark. Let's put it this way. The mark of a Christian household is not that we don't fight. Mm-hmm. The mark of a Christian household is that we learn to reconcile.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of problems in your marriage because you're two sinners. You're going to have a lot of problems in your family because it's a household full of sinners. It is not surprising that we fight. Kids can do that all the time. We're going to do that all the time. What's surprising is that we would actually do this wild thing called reconciling with each other. So the brother's hug is a way to teach that young. But, with my older children, it's usually a walk now, or it's usually let's find a shared activity. It's usually some more sideways way to come at them and remind them I'm with them, I'm for them, I love them. And so however you do it, I just think it's important to think of you must do something rather than nothing. People don't reconcile just because. They reconcile because they work at it, because they say, we have to do this because this is what God did for us. And that's the whole idea here. It's this responding to God's reconciliation. So we should do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you have a question, but I love that the physical aspect of touch, like it gets their attention when they're little kids like that and they're physically hugging. Yeah. They're not distracted, because they're holding on to something. They have something physical to do.
You can even join them if they're having trouble.
It reminded me of like one of the things our premarital counselors told us, like, and it kind of stuck with us, and we're horrible at implementing it. Yeah. But when we do, it's really good. What is it? And that is like when we have conflict, one of the things they said is like, just try, I dare you to reach over and grab your spouse's hand, hold their hand. And like the times that we've done it, like it's really hard to be mad at your spouse when you're holding their hand. And when one of us has the humility to actually do that when we're fighting or arguing,
the chemical reaction of the body.
It's like we're on the same team. Yeah. It's just this like physical reminder cue. Like it just is hard. And so it's the same thing with kids. It's just this physical. Anyways, go ahead.
I know Jeremy has a question here, but I just want to. I just want to insert a quick note because.
We're here to talk to you.
yes, and amen to everything you've just said. In fact, what the Lord has been doing in my life through writing about habit and writing about family stuff like this, like the next logical progression for me, and this is the book I'm working on right now, is called The Body Teaches the Soul. And it is entirely...
dude.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. If I should show you on my desk right here, there's like a million books that I'm like reading and
amazing
about it. But it's on just the paradigm you just set forth, that everything that we do spiritually is because we also do something physically. And we know this with such clarity when we reach out for a spouse's hand, or when we brush a child's tear from their eye, or when we decide as husband and wife to hug even though we're still mad. And it's clear in those points, but there's just a depth of theology that comes from realizing God made you with a body on purpose.
Yeah.
He sent the body of his son to redeem us, and he's going to resurrect us to new bodies. So he loves bodies. And in fact, it is the body that is spiritual. We're never meant to be without it. And so all spirituality is trying to become physical, and all physicality is trying to become spiritual. And this is the theology, right? But this means just in small practical moments. If you want to find a way to forgive, find a way to embody it. If you want to find a way to show your children you love them, find a way to embody it. And this is why we're saying stuff, why we're doing bedtime liturgies, why we're gathering at the door to pray, why we're lighting a candle, why we're cleaning dishes, all these things is because we're saying, if love is love, then let's find a way to act it out with our bodies.
It's why faith without works is dead.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Justin, I'm really excited about that. That's not to go too off script here, but my deep personal passion that there's a book somewhere in the future.
All right.
Is the
different season of life
is the intersection of spirit and flesh. It's like, what is this intersecting, this column of intersection? What is that? What is the chemical spiritual reaction that's undergoing? And some of it can get, there's just so much talked about it that seems to have been forgotten. But when you hear truth, you know it because it's more of a remembering than a learning. Yes. And that's something I've found a lot is like my soul's like remembering these realities, these truths. And again, we were made from the dust. So there's a very much earthly element to us. And then we have the breath, right? So we have but we are both. And we talk a lot on this podcast about health and why the physical matters and why the mind builds the physical. And anyways, I'll make sure to send you guys an early copy, and we should absolutely come back to it because this was my wondering here. And I've found there's a lot of mystery, but that idea that in Genesis 2 we have organic matter, dust meeting the breath of God, and Genesis says a soul was born. That means that we're always with both. We're a divine composite of physicality and spirituality, and so we should never try to leave either. We should never be like, oh well, that's just the body, or that's just the spirit. It's always both. And so we're always any spiritual habit we want around the house, like with kids.
needs to be embodied physically.
I'm riled up, Justin. We got to talk about that.
Let's go.
I mean, that's the dream conversation right there for me. But this one's amazing as well. Let me get back to my question.
Yeah. We're coming back now.
Yeah, so much of what parenting's taught us and just our spiritual journey and what we keep coming around to, and it's like, where is God, right? Like, when it's so hard to do the thing, what do habits do? Well, they force you back into this rut that you choose alignment with God, but like, where is God, And I've found through personal experience, that presence is where he's found most of the time. Like the present, like when you can get out of your mind, out of the fear, out of the kitchen needs cleaning, out of this, out of that, and like you actually meet your kid in the in the level of consciousness where they are. And this is why to them belong the kingdom, in my opinion, or one of the reasons is like, because they're present. They're and in presence is forgiveness and humility and all, because there's no ego that's guiding them. They're being led unknowingly by spirit mostly, but it's just such this beautiful thing. Yet we have everything in the world taking us out.
Taking us back or taking us forward.
The presence. What are your thoughts on the presence? What are some habits that you use to stay, to check back into present, to realign with spirit, shut down the ego, the flesh?
Yes. A lot of technology habits, and I'll describe two of them. But let me first just say how much in agreement I am with you, Jeremy, that the idea that presence is the medium of love, maybe. Like, I don't know how you can love somebody without being with them. And God's design for us in the garden was to be with him and with others. So this idea that we would be present to God, present with each other, is the good life. Like, fundamentally, that's a really good way to describe it. And you also see, the interruption that sin causes is the withholding of presence. We hide behind fig leaves. We hide behind bushes. We hide behind our screens now, right? But the idea is, you're saying, like, noticing life, becoming present again is where God is. And I like the way you put that, because I think it's right in the sense that, we know God is everywhere. We know the Spirit is always with us. We know he never departed. But when our presence, to wake up to that fact, to pay attention again, is the reason attention is so good for the mind and our bodies, is because we discover, once again, God is here. And so two really important daily habits for me that I've now practiced for almost a decade, honestly, are scripture before phone, and then an hour with my phone off each day. And the way this looks in my life is, in the morning, I do not let my phone. It used to be an alarm set on my phone that said, "Don't look at me," But now it's just like out of my morning routine, and so it's sort of like my daily habit that I'm not, quote unquote, allowed. This is a rhythm, not a rule, but I don't look at my phone until after I've spent some time in the Word, meditation, or prayer. And this is a sea change in how you approach the day. I would recommend it to anybody. The amount of presence that is robbed from you when you check social media first thing in the morning, or when you look at your calendar first thing. Or for me, it was work emails a lot. It was like, what am I going to do today? But the heart is asking. The heart's not asking, what am I going to do today? The heart is asking, what do I need to do today in order to be loved? Or like, what's going to make today okay? And so that morning rhythm has just made me so much more present to God and my children. And then the evening rhythm of saying, when I come home from work, I'm going to put my phone away, turn it off for an hour, has been this incredible disruption to the constant onness of, I need to check this, or so-and-so needs to get in touch with me, and just made simple and yet astounding things possible. Like, we'll have dinner together and there won't be phones at the table, or we'll play together, we'll wrestle, and I won't be wondering if a text has come into my pocket. And let me be clear. I'm a corporate lawyer. That's like my day job. I'm a writer. That's my other job. But I'm always on my phone and my computer. Like, it's a huge part of my life. So it's not wrong to look at your phone around your kids. Totally. It's not wrong to have, there's nothing wrong with this at all. In fact, technology is good fundamentally, I believe. But to have interruptive disciplines that allow us to be present to God, scripture before phone, present to others, an hour with your phone off every day, is an urgent cry to reclaim presence in a world where screens have robbed it from us. I mean, they have robbed it from us. And as much as I believe technology is good, it needs a lot of redemption. It's very fallen.
Yes.
But those are two habits that have really helped me a lot, and I think are really important for really any parent.
Yeah, that's so good. On this presence lane here, there's something I've just started to try to teach our oldest, Ember Jean, who's 7, and I'm starting to use the word awareness, or sorry, attention is the word I'm using with her, and just trying to, because from looking at our life, she should assess from a child's perspective. I would imagine she's assessing money is really important. That thing they hold in front of their face makes money is really important. We do light candles at the dinner, and so there's good things that are really important.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get her to realize or start to kind of is no, your attention is the currency, is the value that everyone else wants, that God wants, and your attention's obviously what. You can't become present unless you're first aware you have attention to give to the present.
Yes.
And so I'm starting to kind of plant these seeds of like, where you throw your gaze, right? Where you look, you'll go. Where you stare, what is the?
Where you steer, you stare.
Where you stare, you steer.
Or where you stare, you steer.
Where you stare, you steer.
Yes.
And that's like, that is the fun, dude.
And by the way, here we are back to the body again, right? But in an important way, I think.
Oh, dude, I'm so stoked for you.
I just think it's helpful to us because we beat ourselves up and we feel so guilty and frustrated, and we're like, I don't want to be so distracted. I don't want to feel so anxious. I want to be more present to my kids, and all these things are great, and all these things are higher level descriptions of what our actual problem is, which is good, but to bring it down to say, okay, so where my eyes go, there my attention goes, there my life goes, there my love goes. So let's start back at the beginning.
Gosh.
Literally my eye contact. How can I
Yes.
say I'm going to make a habit to say I'm not going to make eye contact with my work emails until I make eye contact with the Lord? Or how can I make a habit in my home that I'm not going to make eye contact with my text messages until I make an hour of eye contact with my children? And realizing that bodily attention to habit leads the heart. It's sort of like tugging on the reins of your heart and saying, look at your lover long enough and you'll fall in love. Look at your child long enough and you'll be like, oh yeah, like I love this guy. And leading with that eye contact is to give them that sap of life that you mentioned, your attention.
Yeah.
And what a lesson to teach that we dignify with the glory of God when we give somebody our eyes. So give it to them. Put the screen down and give it to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
So we're really bad at that.
Well, I would
just to be frank, but
the reason I write about all this stuff is because I'm bad about it. So I just like center to center talking here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we don't have a very good.
I would say we have become bad at it. Like over each kid, it just gets harder and harder.
And we don't have a go to work, come home from work. Our kids go to school, come home from school. Like we work from home, we homeschool. We, have a property. We're living in a fixer-upper house, lots of projects. We have a lot of things like spinning. And so there's not very clear. We have to make the transition moments, right? Like
you have to make
we
the
have
boundaries.
To say, we have to make the boundaries because the boundaries aren't really set for us. And so it's like, okay, when are we working? When are we not? When are we doing school?
Yeah.
When are we not? And so like
this is our nut to crack
extra
right now.
hard though because it's like not extra hard. Everyone has their own hard, but like what advice would you give to people like us that it's like, we kind of have to be like our phones, not have to, but like a lot of the time, one of the blessings of our job is the flexibility to be with our kids and we can spend a Tuesday and go to the beach with them, but like we kind of have to have our phone. It's still on that Tuesday within reach or like, you know what I'm saying? What? Give us some nuggets.
I think there's a huge blessing and a huge burden there. So I'm different in that, like, I leave for work at 8 a.m. I come home circa 6 p.m. and there's just a distinction.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And so that serves me in that it's easier to create boundaries. It's easier to say, like, this is going to be my home time. This is going to be my work time. But, one of the things my kids miss there is they don't really have a feel for what I do as a lawyer, so I have to bring them to work and like sort of let them shadow. Sometimes I take them on trips, but that the burden is on me to like incorporate them into more of my life. And that's hard, but the blessing is their boundaries. And I think for you all, it's just flipped. It's like the blessing is they're going to get an enormous sense of what it feels like to live as a whole person. And I think you guys are historically the norm, not the exception, that you have kids around your jobs. You're apprenticing them into the farm or into the blacksmith shop or into the shoe cobbler. Like, I mean, most of humanity has lived where they worked and their kids were involved in that work. And so I think you guys have a lot of blessing there and that they get to see a big picture of your life. But I think the burden would be, and this is made harder by technology because it's the blacksmith didn't always carry his hammer and iron everywhere. He wasn't always being like, well, I can get another pound in right now. No, you had to like sort of be in the shop. And I think for you all, and this is really for all parents, but definitely for you all, is to think about we need to teach the art of attention. And we already agreed that that's kind of like the whole idea of life, that we love where we are being attentive. To teach the art of love then is to pay attention to one thing at a time. So to actually have the bravery to say, hey, son or daughter, I'm going to work right now. I'm going to work on this, and this is what I'm doing, but I need that time to do it, and not be afraid of that boundary and say, I'm going to go in this room, or I need you to not bother me. Easier said than done. But the idea that you're working on that boundary. And then on the other side of it is saying, I'm all yours now. And that means different ways of putting your phone down, maybe different rooms of working in. I think the only thing I would add to that is I think a huge deal there is their expectation. So just because I turn my phone off for an hour in the evening doesn't mean I never work in the evening. But one of the things that I'll try to do is if I am going to work, I'll literally say like, and I'll show them. Sometimes I'll get down on one knee. It's like, hey, I'm writing an email to one of my clients right now, and it's going to take me a couple minutes. But when I'm done with this, I'm going to put this away, and we're going to play, okay? And like, do they see my divided attention? Yeah, because I have an obligation, and it's good, and I'm teaching them about it. But when I'm done with this, I'm going to put this away and saying, you can expect my attention now. Like Saturday mornings, you can expect my full devotion. Tuesday afternoons, you expect my full devotion. When I'm done with this email, you can expect it. And helping them realize that life is not unburdened by work. Like we have to do it, but it can be in rhythms of presence, and we can be really attentive to the goodness of our work. We were made to. Like most of our life will be spent working, and that's great. And we're really attentive to the presence with other people, and those things aren't opposed, but they do need to be drawn in boundaries.
Yeah, really good. What is there anything else for just before we wrap up? If you could go back in time to when you had little kids, I know your youngest is 6 or 7, but when your oldest was 6 or 7, looking back, like
that's a lot of our audience.
What things are crucial to this season of life for young families when their kids are all little, none of them are in school yet, or maybe one's in school, you're kind of on the brink of entering into these, really it being really more important to have these habits and rhythms.
Yes.
Give us your most important, nuggets for this season of life.
Oh, this one's easy. Friendship. Because this season of life is so difficult. And often the first thing to go is our friendship with our spouses and with other people outside our families, because life is so complicated and hard. But friendship with our spouses and with people outside our families is actually the first thing we need. It's the first thing to go, but it's the first thing we need because no one can do this alone. And so anybody thinking about, I want to create some new rhythms for my household. Well, one of the things we know about the psychology of habit is that you can't do it alone. You need people to help you get into new rhythms because, like as we talked about earlier, life is more a product of communal rhythms, not individual ones. And this is also the biblical wisdom. Like you were not meant to experience God, just you and him. In fact, God looked at Adam in the garden and said, it's not good that you are alone, which is wild because Adam was with God. You would think of that as paradise, like just me and God. God said, something's not good here because you can't experience me the way you were made to until you experience me alongside others. Wow. And I think so many parents, for understandable reasons, we get our heads underwater so much that we begin to live just as like a nuclear family unit, just trying to do our thing, when we need other people in their life. Like we need aunts and
Yeah.
uncles, we need grandparents, we need friends. And this was, there's no coincidence, I think, that right after writing Habits of the Household, my next one, I think it's sitting on the shelf behind me, the next book that I worked on is called Made for People, because I started to realize that if you're not deeply engaging in community, you can't do this very well. And so I tack it on here because I think it's counterintuitive. You think, oh, right now it's just me raising the little ones, but it can be one other person, it can be one other family, but you need to intertwine your life deeply with someone else's life, because they will remind you you're not crazy. Everybody struggles with this stuff. They will help you adopt new rhythms because you talk about them together. So much of the wisdom of Habits of the Household was other people's wisdom of saying, like, I'm talking to friends who are doing this and I learned this from that person. And but fundamentally it comes down to what all of life comes down to, and God made us so that we were to experience him in community, which means we need to raise our kids in community, and they need to see other people doing this stuff. So that's my answer, is friendship.
That's really unexpected, but I think it's really good. I mean, it's certainly something that hits, like that's been the first thing to go for us, for sure. And we, this past year of our life, we lived with my parents. So in a different way, friendship, like you're saying, the aunt and uncles thing, we lived with my parents as we were renovating our house for an entire year. But our friendships certainly took a bullet on that, because we couldn't invite people over, couldn't have hospitality in the same way we're living in my parents' home. So it was like a little bit different. But then it's been really hard for us to shift out of that. Like, okay, we kind of like didn't do any hosting for a year, and then we had a baby. We moved back into our house, had a baby, and now it's like, okay, we're getting back. We haven't really got back to that communal. It's been the thing that's suffered, So that's a good encouragement for us.
Yeah, I mean, which is why that's the answer I wanted to throw a monkey wrench in with at the end.
Yeah.
Because in college,
it's
it's sort of obvious, right? In college, you're like, oh, of course we'll do friendship, or in different stages of life, it's of course we have community. It's particularly in these years that you get knocked off so much. So it just needs to be that reminder to come back, come back, come back. Whenever Jesus calls us, he calls us with other people. And so your call to parenting is the same.
Yeah. And I think as you're talking, like, one of the things that I think young families, and myself included, maybe need to recognize with that call to community is just that it's not going to look like it did in college, and it's not going to look it does right now 5 years from right now. Like, when you're kids, right now, we just have to be so interruptible, just interruptible all the time, right? So, like, having a conversation with other adults is very difficult unless you have childcare, which you're paying for, which if you have family that's close. So, but it's not a forever season, and I think a lot of times we don't do it because we think it's going to be this forever thing, but it's not. It's really like a 5-year, 6-year span of time, depending on how many kids you have, where it is really hard. Like, you're going to have a really messy house when you have another family over and there's 10 kids playing in your living room afterwards, but it's important still to do it,
Absolutely.
I think that is a reminder that we all need. It's just like, hey, it is going to be hard in this season.
Yeah.
And I think if you can just, the lowest common denominator maybe would say, if you can just have a touch point with a friend each week. Like, let's say you're a mom, you're feeling underwater, but you say, hey, on Thursday nights, me and my girl, like, we FaceTime for just an hour, like in the messy house. And we say, like, how you doing? Like, what can I pray for you for? And talk honestly about life. That single habit will transform you. It's just 1 hour out of your week, but it will change all the other hours. And, it can grow from there. But that one idea of just saying, we're going to have a touch base and I'm going to speak honestly with somebody about my actual life rather than live hidden behind the fig leaves and the bushes, it will change you. Like, again, it can be small and ordinary. It doesn't have to be hosting friends for a Friday night, beautiful dinner where the kids miraculously somehow behave. Like, no, it's not that season, but one conversation a week will change your life.
Really good.
That's really, really good. Cool. Well, this has been awesome, Justin.
I wish we could keep chatting.
Yeah.
We have to do this again. I think we got a lot more to talk about. So
we do.
We do. We will.
Yeah.
So you got a couple books, Justin. Let us know where people can find you, a website, hear more.
Yeah. You go to justinwhitmellEarly.com, or Justin Whitmell Early is my Instagram handle as well. And both of those places will lead you to my books on habit, on family, on friendship, and the upcoming one on the body. I'm probably most active on Instagram, so if people want to look for reels there or like intros to the books there, I post a lot there. But people are always welcome to reach out, and I'm honored that you would. So thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure.
So much.
And we'll link all that below in the show notes.
Yeah, and the Instagram, we didn't even talk about that, but your Instagram reels are so helpful. Just like those quick, explaining ideas, encouragement for young parents. Like,
you've got the template.
There if you're, go there if you need some encouragement and just like nuggets from this book. Like, you really know how to do that macro to micro content.
Well, that's good. I'm always trying to give people as many ideas as possible because I've always benefited from them. But, and this is a good place to end, you got to know any conversation about habits. The big takeaway is that habits don't change God's love for you. God's love for you should change your habits, and that's the whole reason it's worth talking about.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Justin, thanks for the time.
We'll talk soon. Thanks, Justin.
Y'all are the best. Thanks.